thank you for coming and thank you for being here. I am at this moment, so for those who don't know, I am Cantor Eyal Bitton at Congregation Neveh Shalom in Portland, Oregon. And we organized this really last minute. You know, October 7th hit us all really, really hard, everybody in the Jewish community around the world. And we've been dealing with it in various ways and talking about the horrors, talking about Israel, talking about security, talking about ourselves, talking about our futures, all kinds of things, and responding as clergy, responding to various needs in our communities. And whether they are finding ways through the service to acknowledge what has happened and be in community, or whether there are community events like the concert I'll be giving next Wednesday with members of our wonderful community here in Portland. And so if we organized this, I was sitting and talking to the team at Neveh and talking about this idea that I had about doing these conversations about Israel and Jewish identity. And I was looking at the calendar and going, when's the best time to do this? And I realized there is no best time. Let's just start now. Let's start this week and build from there. So there was 2 days notice. I thank you for signing up so quickly. And 2 days ago, when I put this idea together, I didn't know that I would have a special guest. And I do. I reached out to my friend Randy Kessler from Stand With Us in Seattle, and he said, I've got someone for you who's going to be perfect for this event. And she's here with us. Her name is Zoe Burstyn, and she is the associate director of a division of Stand With Us called Center for Combating Antisemitism. Thank you for joining us, Zoe. And I'll say a couple more things, and then I'm going to ask. So today's session is called "The Future of American Jewry." There is so much to examine regarding the repercussions and implications of the October 7th massacre, which I call it that. I don't know what other people are calling it, but that's how I'm referring to it. So many implications, and we can sit here and have several hours of conversation. And instead, I thought I would create these different sessions over the following weeks to look at different elements of what we're dealing with. And I thought, we love Israel. We need Israel. We want the IDF to protect its citizens, to protect and safeguard the Jewish homeland. And here we are in the United States. I'm from Montreal, and I think some people here might be from Canada. So here we are in North America, and we're watching what's over there with horror and with fear, but we're watching the implications here as well. We see all the talk that used to happen about the semantics of whether anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism or what have you. We see that when you have people who want to destroy Israel, there is a spilling over of anti-Semitism. There is rhetoric. There are actions that have an impact, a direct impact on the Jewish communities around the world, and certainly over here in North America. And I was thinking, what's tomorrow like here in the States and in Canada? What type of future do we have? I have young children. Kids are afraid in universities right now. There are mobs sometimes, and they've got to be hidden by security basically in a library, kind of in an attic, as it were. Is this the future? What does this mean for us? We have neighbors, friends who are wonderful, and some who used to be wonderful and have suddenly abandoned us in certain ways and sided with people who want to destroy the Jewish people. And we're like, what type of future is this? How stable am I? I see how it's worse in England and in France, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of people who are in the Jewish community who are going to pack up and go. What does that mean for us? So that's a bit of introduction and thoughts at my end, and I want to hear from our guest Zoe, who is on the ground here, dealing with all kinds of reports of anti-Semitism and looking at the implications, and I think is uniquely positioned to kind of help us talk about some of these issues. And in terms of format, Zoe and I will be talking for a little while, having this exchange, and a little later, I will invite you to for a Q&A, not to be mic'd, but if you have a Q&A, you'll be able to type your question in the chat, and then we'll talk about that. But first, she and I will have a conversation. Zoe, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your desire to get this ball rolling on this series. I think that it's incredibly important and a really good opportunity for us all to process how things are from here on out.
For saying that, and that's what I'm getting from congregants and from friends, just talking, just trying to wrap our minds around what we're seeing. So we've all seen a direct impact on Jewish life outside of Israel as a result of October 7th, as I mentioned. In London and in Europe, I think it's worse. What are some of the incidents? What are the specific examples of how it has had an impact on our communities here in North America?
Well, we are absolutely seeing a dramatic increase in the number of reported anti-Semitic incidents of, varying degrees of severity. We're seeing reports of vandalism. We're seeing reports of very disturbing pro-Hamas rallies taking place across the country on campuses and off campuses. And we're really just experiencing a lot of shock and fear, and I would say a sense of growing isolation, especially on, I would say, the left end of the political spectrum. I'd say that American society has done a fairly decent job of at least being able to identify anti-Semitism to the right of the aisle. But there is, as anti-Semitism is, the oldest hate, it is also the most evolving hate. And so I think what we're really seeing is a fleshing out or coming out of the woodwork of this newer, more contemporary anti-Semitism that people really did not have a visceral grappling with until confronted with it and with the results of the massacre on the 7th. So I'd say overall, we're experiencing a sense of culture shock in a very intriguing way.
Yeah, it's thank you, Zoe. We're in a, when I first moved here, I remember to Portland, Oregon from Montreal. I remember speaking to someone talking a bit about the lay of the land of the community here. And this was 2017. And she was saying to me, we were so shocked that Trump won because nobody was for Trump where we are. And I'm not talking about whether or not you should vote for Trump or anything like that. My point is this: when your entire world around you is a certain way, you're kind of shell shocked when you find out that the rest of the world is not that way. But here, they have found, this community has found its place in a certain left. Have you heard people feeling like, oh my gosh, where is my political and social home now? Where's my place on the left? Have you been hearing?
1,000%. I mean, I think we all live in our self-selected bubbles. Absolutely. Like we tend to gravitate towards people who feel similarly to we do. We move to areas where people align in whatever values you tend to prioritize. The nature of things. But one of the larger issues with especially the intersectionality of Jewish identity is that you might think you are part of a larger community, and then occasions will happen where that bubble bursts and you realize that as much as you feel a part of this group does not recognize you in the same way. And so again, we're seeing this growing sense of isolation and abandonment that in many ways, it can be existentially terrifying. Absolutely. To have the curtain pulled back in a way. But I would say that as terrifying, and yet also I find this a little comforting, you know, there wasn't really a seismic shift that happened after the 7th. This was already there. We are just now coming to grips with it. In many ways, I liken it to a bad test result from a doctor. The doctor is not pronouncing that this new thing has developed. The doctor is letting you know that this thing already exists.
Okay.
And so one of the things that I like to call the hallmark of growing up is realizing that, the horrible things that we think isolate us and make us, feel weak and alone are actually also the things that unite us. We are not alone in this. And I think it is incredibly important to remember that, as terrible and isolated as we are all feeling right now, we can take heart in the fact that, there are 15 million other people feeling roughly the same way you are. You are part of a larger group who is experiencing a similar shell shock, and that we all can and should be there for each other as we adjust to this new, more obvious reality.
Right. It's I appreciate that. I think I'll come back to some of those ideas a little later, because I want to end with hope. And but first, I want to go through the yucky stuff.
Yeah.
No, well, I want to confront some of the things that we're looking at, and to understand what some of the fears are. It's wonderful that we have each other. It's important that we have each other. It's amazing that, given some of the divisions that we've seen in the Jewish community, that something like this can unite and kind of remind us of the important commonalities that we have and the fundamental identity that we share. Now, we are, as a people, why are we coming together? Because we are seeing something that's the ground is shifting below us. It may have shifted, as you said, already, and some of us noticed it more than others, but as you said, it's being peeled away and we can see it better. And I think we need to talk about it and understand it so that we know how to deal with it internally, with our friends, with our children. So when we talked about the incidents of anti-Semitism that we've seen, now, would you say that anti-Semitic explosion and rhetoric occurred, it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing, occurred as a result of the October 7th massacre, or as a result of Israel defending itself?
It's an intriguing line to define, because we were seeing immediate responses, immediate rallies before Israel began to defend itself. So I would say that anytime Israel is in the news, anytime Jews tend to be more visible, and this always happens around, Hanukkah is the holiday that people know about. So, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, we would play the, how long before the giant menorah gets vandalized game, which is, not something any other group should have to play. But this is the, reality of growing up Jewish in a world where Jews are a very small minority and yet a very large boogeyman. So again, it is more of I would say, a reaction to people remembering that or being reminded of the fact that Jews exist. And therefore, the anti-Semitism that was already there, having an excuse to become more public. And we are seeing just an incremental rise in the comfort level and mainstreaming of anti-Semitism in a way that we haven't seen, since the 1940s.
So you brought up the 40s. Let me talk about that for a moment. We keep seeing things like in social media and Facebook with friends, never again is now. Do you feel, and there are different things to talk about regarding that, but do you feel that we're in 1936 again? If so, why? If not, why not?
I always hesitate to harken back to a particular period in history, because I feel like that discounts the fact that, anti-Semitism is a current undercurrent and an ever-present undercurrent just in general. Anti-Semitism did not disappear after the Holocaust. Anti-Semitism didn't miraculously appear with the first concentration camp. It is an ever-present existential harm that ebbs and flows. And so, for example, my grandparents were survivors, and after my grandfather died and we were going through his things, we found a memory book from an earlier pogrom. Like this wasn't just, oh my God, they experienced this horror. It was the next in a long line of horrors. And so I think that, again, trying to pin particular moments in history as identifiably worse than others really does a disservice to the fact that it is a constant and ever-present threat.
Right. You bring up a good point. Unfortunately, a good. I mean,
Yeah.
we've in recent times, in the BLM movement, and a few years ago, we dealt with the idea that there's systemic racism as a result of several hundred years of shall we say, discrimination and all kinds of levels with the Black community. And I remember thinking, goodness, if there is truth to the idea that racism exists in the ether and social ether of North America, of the States, as a result of these a few hundred years of oppression and Jim Crow and what have you with the Black community, what does that mean for societies that had Jews in it for 2,000 years, where we had 2,000 years of anti-Semitism in Europe, and we had about 1,400 years of anti-Semitism of a different nature in the Arab world. And I'm Moroccan on one side, German, Jewish on the other, and we have our stories there too. So you bring up a good point that this is sort of always there. But I want to bring up a few more things before we turn it to the Q&A as well. People feel, I believe, that they're feeling like salt is being poured on their wound. Not only did the massacre of October 7th happen, which was horrific. I really don't think that anybody has seen such atrocities on video, on pictures, in their lifetimes. Forget Jews, just I don't think we've seen it. And to see that, one, but not only that, two, it quickly turned to the equivalent of Holocaust denial right away. Oh, prove to me that this happened. Prove to me, and that's another salt in our wound. And then there's another salt now where, no, now you are the oppressor. Your people are the oppressor. We saw, what are the risks, would you say, for American Jews? Looking into your crystal ball, what are the risks for American Jews in the future here? Now, you talked about this anti-Semitism that's it's sort of like the baseline of Jewish history in a way. It's always been there. Okay. Well, with what we're seeing now, with the universities, with ACLU saying what they've said, how do you think? What's your prognosis on the American Jewry? How stable are we? What is life like for us?
So I would hesitate to, I don't know, proclaim doom and gloom or say that, we should all, just hide in our homes and be terrified. I think that rather what we need to focus on is the proactive steps, the burden that we now face to keep ourselves, I don't want to say relevant, because that's a terrible thing to have to say, but to inform others that we are human, we are people, we are just like them and are deserving of the same protections that they would demand of us. And so I think that it really, it becomes burdensome on us to do all of the things that we think should come naturally to others. And very, to use like the left-leaning parlance, we like to talk about allyship a lot. And so unfortunately, like, it will be incumbent on Jews to explain in ways they haven't had to before why allyship is important, who Jews actually are, what their identities mean to them. And really you just have to go on an on an offensive and just be like, look, I am a person, but I am a person who has these other things than you. That does not in any way negate my personhood. And so like I find myself now having to have many conversations with young people, particularly. They're like, shouldn't they already know? And yes, they should absolutely already know these things. But unfortunately, as we have seen, again, in times past, we have to do a lot more work to explain to people why what they might be saying is really just indicative of a long history of anti-Semitism that might be societally ingrained, and why that isn't okay. You're going to have to do a lot more work to establish an equality between Jews and other identity structures that we don't also have. And then we have Israel. This is the first time in 3,000 years that the Jews have had a place to call home, which is super wonderful and amazing, and like all of these great things and the fulfillment of thousands of years of longing. But it also allows for the cover of political discourse to hide deeply anti-Semitic problems.
Hmm.
And so, and this is always, again, when we talk about Jewish intersectionality, what are you first? What are you at all? I am a woman, I am a Jew, I am all of these things, but where does Israel fit into your own personal identity structure? And we all have to ask ourselves that anyway. We have to figure out who we are, what we prioritize, where our values lie. But when it comes to Jews, there's a particular added burden especially placed upon us by other people, because Jews are asked to identify or negate part of their identity in a way that others, well, first of all, would never happen. Second of all, would not be tolerated by larger inclusive spaces. And even if they choose not to prioritize, or accept Zionism as part of their lives, other people who don't like them will put that on them. And so it's an interesting thing where I'd say for Jews more than for other minority groups, we see other people's forced identity structures placed on them, and the burden is on them to combat it. And isn't that just terrible? But it is also where we are.
Amazing insights. Thank you, Zoe. I really like that what you said, that it's unfortunate that it's needed. We'd like to have been further along, but we still have agency. We still have a voice. And you're saying speak up and speak loudly, if I may paraphrase.
Speak up, speak loudly, but also speak respectfully. No one, just the last thing you want to do to an angry person is scream, calm down, because goodness knows I would not respond like, oh yeah. And I would say that, like, yes, there are bad actors out there, to paraphrase the great sages, haters gonna hate, but but we also can't let them rain on our parade. I'd say for the vast majority of people who tend to be spouting the things that, make me deeply personally uncomfortable and very much scream the alarm bells and dog whistles of anti-Semitism to me, are parroting what they know without knowing better. And so it is incumbent upon those of us who know better to teach them to know better. And it is exhausting. It is absolutely exhausting. And that you know in your heart of hearts you shouldn't have to. But we do it for ourselves. We do it for those who can't do it anymore. And we do it so that other people don't have to. So again, I think it is very important for us to try to maintain at least a calm facade. Again, because we are, again, part of a long cycle of anti-Semitism, I think that it is also a wonderful thing to know that we are part of a long cycle of anti-Semitism. We have survived all of these things. We will continue to survive all of these things because we come from a culture that has learned to continue in spite of all of these odds, and we will continue to do so. We must simply take on the same mantle that our grandparents, great-grandparents, and other ancestors have had to, and that is have the agency, teach ourselves, teach our family, teach our friends that we are people too, and we deserve to be here just as much as they do.
I thank you. Yes. There are times when I think after this, I'm going to look at the chats and then we can take questions. But there are times where I thought, like, thank God we have political. We have Biden has stood with Israel, for example, right? And I say that as an example, specifically that, but also that there's a lot of support for that. Not full support, there's a lot of support, and but when I look at the future of American Jewry, I go, oh my gosh, we are, what if somebody from the squad were president today? What would that mean for Israel? What would that mean for us? And then I look at the future leaders on campuses. all these law students, all these educated individuals who say the most hateful things that we would have thought 5 minutes ago were nonsense. How could someone say that? And then I go, wow, what is that future look like for us? Is there, if that's the future of leadership, what chance do we have? But what you're saying is key, which is, I'm again, not to incorporate what you said, not paraphrase, incorporate what you said. It's not too late. We do have to speak. And if you don't speak, you can't effect change. You can't influence. So I'm going to look at the chat and go in order and see what was said. Raisa says, based on history, one thing is for sure, that we shouldn't remain silent. We need to oppose the monster who is spreading like a bad virus, worse than COVID. What would be the most effective way to not be silent? This addresses what we were just talking about now. And why are college administrations, why do they remain silent? What's going on with that? So it's these are big questions.
By and large, college administrations are standing by the principles of free speech in a way that, again, they haven't had to for other forms of hate speech before. And I highly recommend, so Mark Rowan has been spearheading, I would say, a very interesting donor campaign to no longer fund the University of Pennsylvania, on which he was a member of the Board of Regents, I believe. And he has done an excellent job making the rounds of, I think, the financial talk shows. I don't know if he was on Squawk Box, and it was really just an amazing overall look at his take on administrative silence. And so what we're seeing is a reliance on the letters, let's, for the lack of the better word, letter of the law of standing with free speech. But there's a difference between standing with free speech and providing moral clarity. And so one of the things that, we at the Center for Combating Antisemitism really focus on is sending more what we call moral clarity letters to administrations that choose to remain silent. There's a difference between respecting someone's right to say something hateful and amplifying it. There's as Sacha Baron Cohen loves to say, there is a difference between freedom of speech is not freedom of reach. So it is incumbent upon people who, although they can respect someone's right to say something terrible, like they have a moral obligation to come out and say, this is terrible. They can say it, but we do not condone it, that kind of thing. And so what we're seeing is, I would say, again, a moral failing on a large scale to recognize that anti-Semitism is a gigantic societal problem. And it could come from many different ways. Again, like there is the cover of, is this political discourse? Is it not? At what point do people just not understand what anti-Semitism is? And, my goodness, again, because it is the longest and most evolving insidious form of hate, again, it is very difficult for some people to recognize, and it is difficult for people who even recognize it to articulate it. And so, shameless plug, bring me back. We can talk about, again, one of our center's focuses is on teaching and educating about the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. And, oh my goodness, anti-Semitism has been around forever. So many people are defining it now. It's like, well, yes. The reason we have a term for anti-Semitism rather than the catch-all racism was in and of itself anti-Semitic. Wilhelm Marr in the late 1880s developed a term for the scientific study of why I hate Jews and called it anti-Semitism. So the term itself is anti-Semitic.
Oh, wonderful.
And isn't that glorious? And so, we have for so long allowed those who do not like Jews to define Jews. And I think that's part of the larger issue.
I love what you're saying. I hate that we have to talk about it, but I love what you're saying. And there's an author, a Jewish activist named Ben M. Freeman, who keeps saying, don't let others define Judaism. We have to be the authors of our own narrative. And look, with anti-Semitism, the definition. I know there's been a huge campaign to try to get IRA, the IHRA, definition to be across the board. I believe that that's where a lot of effort should happen in the Jewish community. People over here, in the chat, if you have an opportunity, use your voice to get that to be an official definition in any institution and in every institution. I can't. This is going to be the topic of a different conversation. I've had people out of the blue who are not Jewish write to me and tell me what is a Jew and what isn't a Jew, or what is and isn't anti-Semitism. And what do I know? I've just been a Jew for over 50 years and I'm clergy, but please let me know. All right. Sarcasm aside, let me go to the next comment in the chat by Corey Rayton. One fundamental issue, in my opinion, is that the narrative of Jew/Israel as oppressor that underpins the comfort people have to share Jew hate and criticism of Israel. How do we dismantle this narrative? It feels like a Herculean task.
Absolutely. There are days when it absolutely feels Sisyphean, which is apparently a word I use all the time now. I would say that, people really like dichotomies. People really like the black, white, bad, good, oppressor, oppressed, colonizer, colonized language. And one thing, again, that I think educating just about the history of anti-Semitism teaches us is that Jews are always that other thing. Now it is colonizer, colonized. Now it is oppressor, oppressed. Before it was, Jews are, and it's, white, but all of these Jews are whatever you are not. Jews are whatever that bad thing is. And so, again, we do considerable work in the Center for Combating Anti-Semitism and Stand With Us at Large to dispute and provide fact-based arguments against, these very, very catchy, but, factually incorrect narratives. In fact, I love one of the things that we like to call them is like stolen narratives. And, these are activists who, they start with intentional activism, co-opting what are very real historical traumas and then saying, and this is what Jews are doing. That is, again, completely, yes, these initial things happened. These initial things are awful and horrible, but Jews did not do them. Jews are not continuing to do them. And so as much as it is a very large, like nebulous monster, the best way to go about it is to find the individuals within your circle who are saying these things and having the calm, rational discussions to change their mind. Again, you are not going to change the minds of the bad actors, but you are going to change the people who hear them and parrot them without knowing that there is a difference. If they don't know that that isn't what's happening, they will believe that that is what's happening. My goodness, if the things were true that I was hearing, like, yeah, I would be the first one, but I know that they're not true. And I have to be able to, in the best and most effective and impactful way, teach people to know better. And again, that also, it does a tremendous disservice to the people who have suffered these original horrific atrocities as well. Another one that we're seeing that is, a slander du jour is the idea of the apartheid myth. Apartheid was real. People are still experiencing the effects of apartheid, but it is a tremendous disservice to the people who have suffered under apartheid to either proclaim it as the responsibility of Jews, or that they are continuing to perpetuate apartheid in a country where apartheid does not exist. And so they are doing double damage. One, they are promoting disgusting anti-Semitism and really devaluing the horrors of the original incident of apartheid. And so again, when we have these discussions, it is important to maintain and emphasize the facts and the human aspect of the consequences of perpetuating these lies.
Yeah, thank you, Zoe. A lot to say on this, but I'm going to, I have more sessions. You said invite you back. I have more sessions in mind, and I'll talk about them later if I remember. But one of them is anti-Semitic. What do we do about the Jewish education? How do we deal with that? What do we do about our allies? And a few other things, but I'll come back to that after. But I'll look at Nurit Kahana's comment in the chat or question. How do we deal with anti-Semitism from organizations like Jews for Peace that are actually part of the Palestinian movement? And by the way, there have been people I mentioned, non-Jewish people who've reached out to me to tell me who is a Jew and who isn't. It's this sort of thing as well. They're like, listen, this is the type of Jew you should be, a Jew for part of this organization.
I always think it is important to remind people that it is okay to speak as an individual. It is not okay to speak as a mouthpiece for a group or to elect yourself representative of a larger group. Here I am working for a nonprofit that fights for Israel and the Jewish people, but I do not ever lay claim to the mantle of speaking for Jews everywhere. And I think that we should all be mindful of that moving forward. Um, and I would say that anti-Semitism, along with racism, like these are all internalized issues as much as they are external to us. Black people have the same horrendous impressions of other Black people as people of other groups do as well. Jews can be anti-Semites too. I think we all fall victim to these larger stereotypes and tropes. So it is incumbent upon us to examine and work on our own implicit bias as much as it is explicit bias, because it is our implicit bias that becomes explicit bias. And so I think it is always important when we have these conversations to break down the who, the how, and the why. We have to understand when we're talking to other people and they say, well, what about these people? Again, I use larger visceral examples. Oh, cool. So Westboro Baptist Church, do they represent all Americans? Is that just like a thing? How about all Christians? Like I saw them protesting at a funeral just a couple blocks away from my house the other day. And I was like, oh, so all of you are like, is that what you're saying to me?
That's
And so
excellent. I really like that point, which is turn it around and ask them the question that let them think a little bit.
yeah.
That's excellent. Thank you. I mentioned Ben Freeman, who I really like. He started this. He wrote this book called Jewish Pride, and he is a member of the LGBTQ community. And he said that he had, for much of his youth, great shame about his identity as a gay man, and he had internalized that external vision of who he was, and he found great empowerment in the pride movement of the LGBTQ community, where I can turn this around. And he acknowledges, he says, similarly to that, exactly like what you said, there is this internalized anti-Semitism that it doesn't make you a bad person. You could be a bad person for other reasons, but it's like, this is from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of that, and you incorporate it, and it's a struggle. It can be a struggle to break out of that. Let me go to another comment. Nancy Diamond: I have asked some of my Christian friends if they would support and protect me if things get worse. I'm not sure what the question is in that, but I'm sure you've seen that be mentioned. There's a meme going around. Would you hide me? And that goes to my question earlier. Are we on the cusp of that sort of time? Where do you think this question comes from, and do you think it's a useful question, or what do you think it really means?
Well, again, I think it speaks to the larger sense of like fear and isolation people are being confronted with. So many people will and have lose friends over this, or will have to re-examine relationships that they thought were solid. But oh wait, you've always seen me as that Jew, haven't you? And you're like, oh, I'm sorry, I thought I was just Zoe. And so, again, like, yes, it is awful that these things are coming about, but there are instances of light in the darkness. These are opportunities to deepen friendships, or to really just explain the harms that you are experiencing right now, and to create moments of solidarity. I think that it is not, I would really hate for people to start believing that it is an us versus them world, because that is, well, first of all, it's counterproductive. I think that if we are to fight for our place as humans just like any other in society, the worst thing we can do is come at it from a combative perspective. And so again, it's really just reminding people that you are human too, that they are human, that we are all on this blue marble together, and that, again, as isolated as we feel, these are opportunities to connect, even with people who do not share the same historical trauma that we do.
Thanks again. In the chat, I'm going to skip over a couple of things I think we've already addressed. Weaponizing of certain terms. You said, here, Corey mentions genocide, war crimes, oppressor, but you talked about that in conjunction to apartheid and these terms that where people are, if you could address that. Sherry Cordova says, I'm an American of Jewish faith. My religion is not my nationality. Judaism guides my code of ethical behavior and my values in rearing my children, serving the Jewish community, and participating in our greater society. World politics cannot change my faith. It only encourages me to be even more vocal about the Jewish code of behavior. Okay.
So I think that this is an interesting moment to talk about what Jewish means, because it means so many different things to so many people. And again, that makes it hard to define and educate people on, like, are we a religion? Are we a race? In Europe, Jews are defined as a separate race. When I was in high school here in Seattle, we checked a different box on the SATs than like the white kids. I would say that the thought behind that has shifted since, as Jews have since been pigeonholed in a very different social strata. But are Jews an ethnicity? Are Jews a race? The problem is that the answer is yes. And how you, which is, great, really helpful. Thank you so much, Zoe. But again, this comes down to not necessarily how you define yourself, but how the people who don't like you define you. And so I think, again, this speaks to something that, again, Jews have grappled with for a long time. If we look at the state of Israel, for example, Israel did not use the requirement for Jewish citizenship of, the halachically like Jewish mother thing. Like, it went with what the Nazis did to determine whether you were safe or not. And I think that is incredibly important to understand. And it is something that, by and large, I'd say larger Jewish communities have had to grapple with. And that is that protection of Jews, protection of Jewish identity really needs to come from an understanding, not of how you define yourself, although that is like obviously incredibly important, but of how the people who don't like you define you, so you understand and are not blindsided by these identity attacks. And so, again, a lot of that will also come from, educating oneself and determining how you feel about different aspects of your identity to be able to articulate this to other people. But we have to understand the slings and arrows people are using against us so that they don't become mortal wounds.
Very well said. Thank you, Zoe. This is why, for me, the term, the argument of whether or not anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, to me is, I've argued this for a while, it's sort of a semantics thing, because whatever you might think, the effect is what we are seeing. And to enough people, the target of hating Israel is the synagogue, is a Jewish school, is a Jewish community center. And we've got to deal with that reality, regardless of what an absolute truth or personal truth is. We have to look at it the way others, to some extent, how it is seen.
Yeah, I would also like to liken it to, oh, I can't be an anti-Semite because Semite means Arab too. And it's just like, okay, again, let's look at the definition and how it came up. So again, it's really, it is very much centered in the harms of anti-Semitic intent in a way that we don't see with other forms of hate.
Right. Thank you. Sherry Horowitz says thousands of people are marching in support of Hamas. Thousands in many of these cities that we see, New York, Chicago, LA, not small demonstrations. They even closed the Brooklyn Bridge. I view every single one of these individuals as my enemy. Do you? I'm thinking this is a most dangerous time. Are these people against us? Are we, whether, I don't know if it's the focus is the terminology enemy, but people who are against the Jewish people, are they a threat to us?
I think that rhetoric left unchecked is absolutely a threat. I think the level of threat is something that we need to be very cautious of. But again, I don't, in the same way that I'm asking people to not stereotype and pigeonhole me, I need to be careful to not do the same, which is always easier said than done. Our brains are designed to find patterns and things. Otherwise, we would not learn from past experience. We would not be able to function or create a society. If I like, if I stab my hand on a cactus and I go, oh, ouch, and then I do it again, and I don't learn from that, at a certain point, it's like, stabby thing means ouch. Don't touch stabby thing. Like, oh, congratulations, our brains are working appropriately. But that means I should approach the next stabby thing with caution. But, that doesn't mean all stabby things are bad. Like there are some stabby things that give me medicine and I need those stabby things. That doesn't mean I'm going to go out searching for it. But again, we need to learn and be vigilant. But to automatically set up an us versus them again leaves out the possibility of changing the mind of people who you would assume are bad actors but are simply misinformed. Yes, there are people in those crowds who are bad actors. There are also people in those crowds who genuinely believe that they are doing the right thing because they have been fed misinformation. And so to discount the ability of being able to change at least some minds is, I think, problematic.
And what do you think of the following assessment that I would have about those crowds? I look at those crowds, I get scared. I think they're intimidating, and I don't think that's everybody. You can have thousands of people who are awful and willing to spout terrible things, but that's not everybody. It is important, I think, to be aware, like you said, about lifting that mask, whether it's just that person that and you in your circle, and you realize, oh, they think that, but on a larger scale, to realize, oh, this is a real problem. It is, but it's not all there is. There, right? Would you concur with that sort of?
I would absolutely say that. I mean, yes, it is something to be mindful of and vigilant of, but rather than people in the streets, I would be more mindful of, what are people who are in charge of your employment saying? What are people in charge of actually affecting policy doing? I mean, protesting can have a very visceral emotional reaction, but I think that the moments of real vigilance are needed when it comes to how are people reacting to these protests, how are people impacting your daily life in a way that is a problem, like it is indicative of serious problems. We often talk about, sorry, in political circles, people often talk about the silent majority. And so it is what the silent majority ultimately winds up doing that we need to be very careful of. Is there just going to be a passive acceptance? Is there going to be an effort for, improvement and inclusivity and protection of Jewish people in light of these things? We need to, and again, we can affect those things within our own spheres by speaking up, asking for, or informing our employers of, I don't feel safe when I see these things. This is why. Like, what are you doing to protect me at this time?
Now, you just made me think of something else. You spoke just an offshoot of what you said. I've read there were a couple of polls like this where something like 65% of the American public sides with Israel, and like a majority of Republicans, a majority of Democrats side with Israel, and whatever nuances there may be in there. And I was reading some of these stats and going, oh, this is encouraging. And whereas one stat also showed us, one poll showed that while in the 2001 there was, I don't remember what circle, it was like a 40% support for Palestinians. That's not now like 20%. And they may not be vocal there, but perhaps that speaks to what you're saying, and how is that going to manifest? How are we going to hear those voices? There's something else that Corey Rayton mentions, which I'd like to underline or bring forth to us. It's about the sort of divisions in the Jewish community about the role of Israel in our lives. And the idea that she says, how do we have a constructive discourse about the role of Israel, especially with people who don't support Israel at all. And in light of that, like, how can we fight this fight externally and outside the Jewish world when we're not united within the Jewish world? I'm paraphrasing what she wrote.
Absolutely. So again, it is a very nuanced conversation to have, but I think that the idea of Jews needing one monolithic voice is problematic. And the idea that everybody needing to agree is the only definite discourse. I think, something we're moving to societally. Like, if you don't agree with me, we can no longer have respectful dialogue anymore. And I think that that's hugely problematic. I think that I would have more of an issue with people insisting that Jews speak with one voice in the same way that you would not ask all Asians to speak with one voice on an issue. Like, it does not seem to make sense to me that a group cannot have diversity within its ranks. Like, we all should. My goodness, what would dinner be like on a Friday night if I didn't disagree with people? That would be so boring. But I think it is important to, again, have respectful discourse. And so you can believe in something for yourself in a way that should not preclude conversation with someone else. So if people can, like, what we need again is respectful dialogue and discourse. And I think that we need proper fact-based education before people make decisions on what they choose to identify with. And so my larger issue again is based on the education aspect before people come to their own conclusions. And if we rely on, fear-based tactics, if we rely on unfortunate, like, secondhand propaganda, like, that is, I think, a greater problem as a whole.
Okay.
Did that?
Yeah, no, that's thank you. Paul Fogel speaks about this. I'm trying to summarize it, but the CRT movement going mainstream. He says, where were American Jews who are largely leftist when the CRT movement was going mainstream? And he refers to the CRT movement as being very racial and Jews, making the argument that Jews should not align themselves with this movement because ultimately he feels it's a racist movement. Now, I suspect I might ask the question: is, I don't know, you might want to answer that specifically, or to extrapolate perhaps as well. The woke movement, is that a threat to Jews? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
So I'm going to kind of lump them together and then also add the like particular note of, we've actually done extensive work on ethnic studies at Stand With Us. We're very aware of CRT and some of the activist implications therein. And so I would liken this back to our earlier conversation about stolen narratives. Again, CRT has provided the opportunity for a lot of anti-Israel misinformation and bias to come out by, first of all, forcing Jews or forcibly identifying Jews as part of a certain subset of society that is not accurate. It was not written by a consensus of Jewish organizations, but rather by minority organizations that have problematic intent. And I think that without critical examination of the actual oh my God, I'm losing myself because there's just so much in my brain right now. Okay, so without critical examination of like the particulars of, in the same way that I don't want to define, I don't want myself defined by larger things. I don't want to just like go wholeheartedly on CRT. Like, there are some resources that have actually done their due diligence and done good work. There are others that, again, have intentionally or unintentionally adopted very harmful narratives to Jews. And so I think that it opens the door for what could be productive dialogue and discourse. But unfortunately, it is currently being, on the whole, spearheaded by people who either do not understand where Jews fit into it or are choosing not to understand where Jews fit into it. So I think that in the same way that I don't want anyone defining me with their massive, like, Google has told me, expertise, like, I think that CRT and the larger woke movement is really just a congratulations, you've done an excellent job allowing other people to define themselves, allow me to define myself as well.
Okay. Nicely said. Ron Fromstein asks about social media. He wants to post and boost important things that matter to him, and he feels an urge to avoid at the same time. What are your thoughts?
So I personally think social media is just a cesspool on a good day, and like we are not experiencing good days. I would say that, your social media interactions are what you need to be comfortable with. If you want to engage online, like that is your choice. But again, you're really screaming into an abyss. So, pick and choose your fights. And always be mindful that, again, you're not going to change the hearts and minds of the people who really just don't like you. But whatever responses you have, whatever things you post, know that there could be good actors or at least uninformed actors who may or may not be swayed. So again, it's really proceed with caution.
Thank you. I choose, the congregation knows this, I choose to post regularly. I don't post everything that I want to. I try to whittle it down. And one reason I do, it is a cesspool and it drives me nuts. I think my sanity has diminished. But I feel that as a community leader, that there are people, I don't just feel, I know there are people out there in the community who are either worried about posting themselves, or some people who don't know a whole lot and are like, I don't think this is right. What do I feel about that? And they kind of need or look forward to having another voice kind of affirm or educate. I think there are some people, there are non-Jews that I know as well, neighbors who have found, not just mine, but other people's posts to be helpful. And no, we're not going to get the extremes. I'm afraid we're
Yeah,
not going to.
shameless plug, the Stand With Us social media is always updating fact-based information that you are welcome to share. And the Stand With Us Situation Room on our website is, again, always updating with verified on-the-ground resources, as well as language that you can use to dispel some of the more concerning media narratives that we're seeing.
Thank you. Please do use Stand With Us resources. They're phenomenal. They do work like what Zoe's doing right now, but this is just a helpful moment. But they're constantly doing all kinds of things for people of all ages and looking at the Jewish community and anti-Semitism and all kinds of things from various angles. And they have resources. I apologize to everyone who I wasn't able to get to in the chat. There will be more discussions. Next week's discussion, it's not, as I said, this was put together very, very quickly. My hope is to do one weekly, but please look out for announcements on social media, but also in the synagogue bulletin. The next installment, I want to talk about friends, betrayal, and abandonment. How our circles, we've seen some people leave us, or we have chosen, oh my gosh, I cannot remain friends with that person. And Zoe was talking about a little earlier, what do you do about employers, things like this. I want to talk about that. I don't yet have a guest, but we're going to be talking more about that. The week after that, I want to talk about confronting anti-Semitism at different levels, institutional anti-Semitism in our schools, in our political parties, and discuss that and figure out what can be done to address those. After that, I'd also like to talk about, is there a need to transform Jewish education? What worked yesterday for me, going to Talmud Torah in Montreal, does that work today? If not, why not? So we're going to be doing all kinds of things like this. From the community level, please know that next Wednesday here at Neveh Shalom, we're having a community-wide amazing concert called United in Song with 8 or 9 performers, including Cantor Eyal Bitton from Beth Israel, and Kim Schneiderman and Cantor Raina Green and others. Please join us for that. One last thought, and then I'll ask you for a last thought as well, Zoe. The positive stuff. We talked about it earlier, and I think things are terrible. I think that I don't like seeing the mask pulled. I knew it was there, but I don't like what I see. I don't like those thousands of people on the bridge in this city and that city. I don't like losing friends or feeling I have to do that. I worry about my kids and their future. I do. But as we said before, this is not the Farhud of Iraq. This is not the pogroms of 1882. We are not abandoned by the government. We are not abandoned by the establishment entirely. We have, and we're not nothing. We have power. We have influential individuals in our community. We have a voice. We live in a democracy where each voice counts. We have an American president that stands with Israel. These are very promising things. You spoke about, allies who our friends are. I urge all of us to look around us on a personal level, but also institutional, and go, who has stood with us? How can I nurture that? Even if I don't agree with their politics on this or that, can I go to that person and say, listen, I disagree with you on this following issue, but I really value your allyship, your standing with my people, and use our voice. Now is the time to figure out, to speak up. Those are my positives. And I do think that if we do that now, the future for our children can be a good one. Zoe, last thoughts that might give, the topic was the future of American Jewry. What's the positive outlook, and how do we get there in 3 seconds or less? No,
Okay.
just
In the same way that the mask has been pulled off of anti-Semites, we're also seeing a mask being pulled off the Jewish community as well. We're seeing an immense and beautiful rallying, and again, a sense of unification that, again, we haven't seen in some time as well. So while things are terrible and we are inundated with horrible things, we are also seeing really beautiful, really wonderful acts of resilience and positivity across the world as well. So I think it is incredibly important to be mindful of the fact that, we are a group who has, historically experienced and come through tragedy. It will continue. We will continue to rise above and rise up and rise again. And I think that it is, it is because it is our privilege, it is our pleasure, and it is again just like part of the fabric of who we are to survive, overcome, and do better. And I think that is something to be mindful of as we continue.
I appreciate that, Zoe. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your insights. Thanks to Lisa Richmond, who put together managed the actual Zoom event. Thank you all for attending. Again, I apologize to anyone who I didn't get to. If you want, please send me an email. I can see what I can do about getting you an answer, or join me for the next installment. And thank you so much for attending. Have a great rest of your day. This is not an easy time, but we are there for each other, and we need to be. Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you.